For those of you who weren't, who are not aware, this is a masterclass for references. So the reference is a new module we probably added about 2 years ago, I'd say, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But essentially, I mean, it comes from the ongoing problem, maybe some of you deal with, of just dealing with the paperwork of how to get a reference to a referee and then get it back from them, and then you've got to record it somewhere, you know, or at least record the fact that it's been approved, that it's okay, and the person is trustworthy, whatever you need to know about them from the reference. And it's just a logistical nightmare for people. So we took it on ourselves to try and build it, try and make it a lot simpler. And I'm personally, I'm really happy with the result. Actually, it seems to be really, really useful for a lot of people. So essentially, what we do is we just take away all the paperwork, and we say, okay, then let's create a reference form within the system, and then if you want to, you can that reference form can be sent off to a referee. So these are the terms we're going to be using during this masterclass. Reference form, referee is the person you send it to, who needs to answer the questions, and then they'll submit it. They click on a button to submit it back, and then it gets approved by the administrators. And by doing that, it takes away all the paperwork and makes things a lot simpler. And it actually stores the answers in the system, which is where, rather than bits of paper and some file of facts, which people have to deal with, which is just obviously just an old-fashioned, archaic way to do things. We don't want to do that if we can help it. So if I show you a quick, so this is essentially, give you a quick overview. I'm going to take you through the system in a minute. Exactly how it all works. So I just want to give you an overview so you understand. So the admins create reference forms, and the reference form could be like I don't know, my basic reference form, whatever you want to call it, and it has a number of questions on the reference form, like is this person trustworthy? You know, how do you know this person? Is this person trustworthy? And a load of other questions you might want to ask them. Now, reference forms can have levels, which I'll come on to shortly, which means you can have different levels of reference forms. Like you can say, this is a basic reference form. This is an advanced reference form, maybe with more questions about it, which you want to use for volunteers who you think might be getting on more opportunities with vulnerable people and things like that. So you can have different levels of reference forms. Essentially, the reference form is held against the volunteer. In the end, it's always going to be held against a volunteer. Okay, an opportunity might require a reference form. Drag this around. Might require a reference form, but it doesn't mean the reference form is attached to the opportunity. It's not attached to the opportunity. All it's doing is saying, I need a reference form, and then the volunteer would say who the referee is. It gets sent to the referee. The referee would complete it, and it would go back and be held against the volunteer. But by being held against the volunteer, it may then let them get onto the opportunity. But the key thing is the reference form isn't, an opportunity can require a reference form, but the reference form isn't connected in any other way to the opportunity. It just happens to require, in the same way an opportunity might require a DBS. Well, you wouldn't say the DBS is connected to the opportunity. You say the DBS is connected to the volunteer, and it's the same with the reference form. Okay. So admin creates a reference form. A provider who's creating the opportunity might say they require a reference form. The volunteer tries to join the opportunity, and it says, "Oh, wait there, you haven't got this reference form."
Steve.
Yep.
You're not sharing your screen, you know.
Someone could have piped him a bit earlier than that.
I did wonder. I was thinking, is he supposed to be sharing?
It's all right. I've had time to rehearse it now, haven't I? You could have told me. Oh, gave me right. Let me share my screen. It'll make more sense to you now, won't it? Okay. So here we go. So now I've had a chance to rehearse. So the admins, as an admin, you can create a reference form, okay? And it has a level, as I said before. Now, once you create a reference form, it's available to use within the system in a number of different ways. But the most common way is this. When a provider creates an opportunity, they say, well, to get on this opportunity, they require a reference form. Okay. Then the volunteer tries to get on the opportunity, and it checks if the volunteer has got that reference form. And if they don't have that reference form, it says, okay, tell us the referee's name and email address. So the volunteer types in the name and email address. It then sends that reference form off to the referee to complete. The referee completes the reference form. When they complete it, they click on the submit button. It then sends it back to the admin to check it. And once the admin has checked it, then and approved it, then it's attached to the volunteer. Okay, let's go through that again. Admin creates a reference form. Someone creates an opportunity that requires that reference form. The volunteer tries to join the opportunity. It says, all right then, enter in the name and email address of the referee. It sends that reference form off to the referee then. The referee completes it and submits it back to the admin for approval. The admin then approves it. And once it's approved, it's then attached to the volunteer. The point I was making before is the reference forms are always attached to a volunteer. The reference forms, sorry, someone's just tried to join. The reference forms are always attached to a volunteer in the same way that a DBS or PVG, wherever you come from, is attached to a volunteer. You know, your opportunity might require a DBS or might require a criminal record check, but in reality, the criminal record check is always attached to the volunteer. Okay, I think we have a question there. Pop up. Yes, Helen.
When it goes back to the volunteer, can the volunteer see the reference, what the referee has said about them or not?
No.
No,
you can only see if it's been approved, or well,
right,
they're told if it's approved or
yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So now you've seen it from a higher level. Any questions? Any other questions over this process before I actually show you it in practice? Oh, somebody else? Okay, Kerry.
Yeah, obviously from my point of view, Steve, I'm the admin and our members are the providers. I don't want to see all their references coming in and be able to have to approve them. Can it go to a provider for approval?
It can't at this stage, but it's something that that I'm working on at the moment with a couple of development team to do that. Because I'm aware there's a couple of things in the system which for your organizations, they tend to be split. To be honest with you, they tend to be stop presenting the set. They tend to be split. You got organizations who have where all of the providers work for that organization, which it works perfectly for, and this would work perfectly for. Then you've got organizations with external providers, i.e., or maybe a mix of both. So, you know, they're people who don't work for their organization. Now, the reference form system functionality as it stands won't work for that scenario because of the reason you just said.
Yeah.
You've got providers, they'll want to create their own reference forms, and they'll want to approve or deny their own, you know, their references. But at the moment, it's just an admin level thing, so it's only going to work for those organizations who where their providers all kind of, you know, work for their organization. If that makes sense.
Thanks, Steve.
But it is something we're working on because I'm aware that there's a couple of other functions in there which I know we tend to do like this. It's always hard because at what point do you differentiate a provider from an administrator? You know, if you give a provider everything an admin can do, you're like, well, actually, suddenly the admin becomes us. You could have all these providers who have all this, you know. So that's me to be completely honest with you. It's where we draw that line. But that is something I think we will actually go down that road at some point in the future for sure. Because I know I'm talking with them now about expanding it, and I think that would work quite nicely without upsetting people. Allow providers to maybe create and process their own reference forms. We have the same with criminal record checks. Same issue with that as well. You know, because criminal record checks are approved by the administrator, not by the providers. Again, it's where you draw that line. Yep, so it's a good point. Mike? Oh, you're muted, Mike, sorry. Should be a little microphone button at the bottom. You can type your message in if you want, if you can't, if your mic's not working. Nope. Are you sure? Okay, no worries. If you get it working, Mike, I'll you can ask me the question at the end or something. We'll try and hang on at the end of the meeting. We'll get your sound working, and then you can ask me the question then. Okay. Okay. So we're going to go through this process now from creating the admin creating the reference form. Okay. And then adding that to an opportunity, and then the volunteer is going to try and join the opportunity. It's going to ask them to enter in the referee's name and email address. So I'm going to send it off to the referee.
Just share your screen again, Steve.
You got me again, haven't you? Share the screen. Took it off before. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go through the process where the admin is going to create the reference form. Okay, then they're going to create an opportunity and attach it to the opportunity. The volunteer is going to try and join the opportunity. It's going to ask them to complete the reference form, and it's going to put it on there, send it off to the referee. Then the referee is going to complete it and submit it back to the admin. The admin is going to approve it, and then it's attached to the volunteer. Sounds like a lot of moving around, but it's not. It's quite simple actually in practice. So to create a reference form, I'm logged in as an administrator now. Go to the super admin menu, go down to reference forms. Okay, click on add a new reference form here, and we give it a name. Choose a level. Now these levels, these are about, I mentioned this before briefly. It essentially allows you to create more complex reference forms. Like you might say, if they're dealing with someone, if it's just a general opportunity, we need a reference form. But if it's dealing with, you know, the elderly or the vulnerable, then we want to use a higher level of reference. And that literally means creating a new reference form and assigning it a different level. And what that means is when you create an opportunity, so I heard there's a question, I'll come on to it in a second. When you create an opportunity, you can say this opportunity requires just a basic level 1 reference, or you could say this opportunity requires a level 6 reference, the highest level you can get, in which case it will check what reference forms are held against the volunteer when the volunteer tries to get on the opportunity, and it will say, oh, this volunteer's only got a level 1 reference, but this opportunity requires a level 6, for example. And so we would ask the volunteer again to complete a level 6 reference form. It's going to send off a level 6 reference form to the referee. And then it's going to ask them to complete, obviously, a more detailed reference form and then go through the same process again and getting approved by the admin. And then finally, it'll be held against the volunteer again. Okay. Question there? Who's got their hands up? Someone put their hand up? I saw someone put their hand up before. Nope. Okay.
Mike's put in chat.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Mike. Found the chat tab. Yeah, it's a bit hidden away somewhere. If admin approves a reference, can the provider then see it? No. They can't. A provider can say that an opportunity requires a reference, and it won't let them on that opportunity until that volunteer has the desired reference, required reference. But that's it. So all they can do is say they can restrict an opportunity to require that reference form, but that's it. They don't see any information or anything like that in regards to the reference. Okay. So I've created a reference form here. So if you want just to go back, I went super admin menu, down to reference forms. I clicked on new reference form here, give it a name, said this is a basic reference form. You give it a description.
Sorry, Steve, can I just ask, is it admin level that can create references or super admin?
Super admin level, create the reference forms.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so super admins have the access to this cog at the top. Usually, to be fair, the reference forms are only made once, usually, at most once a year. Once you've created them with the questions on, they very rarely change in my experience. So yeah, but they're created by the super admins. Click on the add button here, put in the question. So it might say, how do you know this person? And you might say, well, how can they answer that question? How can the referee, person who's going to receive it, the person who knows the volunteer, how are they going to answer that question? Well, that'd be a drop-down menu, I'm guessing. And it'd be something like work, colleague, friend, I don't know, other. You get the idea. So you've got different drop-down options that are going to appear. Is the answer required? Yes. Add that question in. You might say next question. It might be, are they trustworthy? Might be a yes or no answer. Yes. Okay. Until I decide, okay, I don't want to add any more questions, that's fine. So I can go off the add questions back onto the questions. I can see them here, and I can see the drop downs appearing. Okay. So I've created a reference form now. So the next thing I need to do is create an opportunity that requires that reference form. So if I go down to create opportunity, okay. requiring basic reference form. Reference. Won't bother putting in all the rest of the details, obviously. But there's a question down here. So when you're creating the opportunity now, there's a question. This will only appear when you've created a reference form. You won't see this unless you've got at least one reference form created in the system. It will say, ask for references when joining. Yes. And when I say yes, I get these additional questions appear, 3 questions appear. How many references? Because you might ask for 2. And if you remember, it's always going to check, because it's saying, okay, then this volunteer is trying to get onto this opportunity. And if they've only got 1 reference form, but the opportunity requires 2, it will ask the volunteer to put in the referee's name and email address of a different referee. So it knows it's already got 1, and it knows it needs 2 to get on the opportunity. Okay, so number of references, we'll keep this nice and simple. 1, minimum reference level 1. Yep, I'm fine with that. Then it says, what's my preferred reference form? So it knows that there's 2 reference forms created on that level. So it says, okay, you can, which one do you want to choose? Say Masterclass basic reference form. It's the one I just created, as you know. Say what the start and end dates of the opportunity are. Add the opportunity and authorize it. Okay, so I've created an opportunity now, and it's got a reference form. It's got a reference form attached to it. Okay, so next I'm going to do is do from the volunteers. So we've done this bit here where the reference form has been created by the administrator. And then I've just done that bit where I've created an opportunity and I've said it requires this reference form. It's the next thing we're going to log in as a volunteer and try and join that opportunity. So I'm logged in as a volunteer here to the volunteers page. I click on the search button. Masterclass op requiring basic reference form. So I click on it. I go to join it. Referee's name. Blogs. Referee's email address. Blogs. Made up email address, that one. So it's going to send that reference form off now to this person. It's the referee. Yep, everyone with me? Good. Thanks. We'll take a blah, 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 blah. Basically, it's sent off to reference form if you didn't read that. Okay, so the reference form's gone off to the referee. So next, I need to see what the referee receives. Let's log into the referee's email account here. Which seems a little bit confusing when I'm doing these things in training because I'm bouncing between lots of users. But if you think from the admin side, all they're ever doing is creating a reference form and approving or denying references. From the provider side, they're just creating an opportunity and saying which reference form it needs. And from the volunteers side, they're just trying to join the opportunity and putting in the referee's details. And from the referee's side, they're just getting an email that says, please complete this volunteer reference. And they click on it and it says the name, which should show the volunteer's photo here. Kirsten is offering to join a volunteering opportunity with training application. It gives the opportunity name. So it's given a bit of information to the referee, kind of saying this is what they're trying to do, but you need to complete this reference form for them in order for them to do that. So click on the link. Reference for, that's the volunteer's name, by the way, TK volunteer. I just happen to call this volunteer TK volunteer. How do you know this person? Well, it's a friend. Are they trustworthy? Yes. And I save it. Thank you. Your answers have been recorded. We appreciate your time. Have you thought about volunteering? Then we try and cheekily get the referee involved in your volunteering program. Okay, so from the admin side now, so let's just go back and have a look what we've done. So we created a reference form. We created an opportunity which required the reference form. The volunteer tried to join it. It said, hang on a minute, you haven't got this reference. So the volunteer entered the referee's name and email address. It sent it off to the referee. I've just logged on to the referee's email account and I've completed it and submitted it. And where does it get submitted back to for approval? The admin at the moment. Maybe later, as mentioned before. Maybe it'll be providers as well. At the moment, it's admins. So it goes back to the admin. So what I'm going to do now is show you from the admin side how they approve or deny this reference. So I'm logged in as the admin here. Okay. If they go down to references, the bottom of the volunteer management, says incomplete. Now these are initially, the incomplete means that the reference form has been sent off to the referee, but the referee's not responded yet. They've not filled it out and submitted it yet. But our one has been filled out by the referee and it has been submitted. So it'll be in awaiting approval. It says the volunteer's name, form here, and I can click on the manage button here. Gives me the details, what answers were given. Okay, they said he's a friend and they did say they're trustworthy. Obviously, they wouldn't be your questions, but now I've got a choice here whether I approve them or delete the reference, essentially say no. And then I'd ask them to, you know, get another one, get a different. Either you have to make that decision then, don't you, at that stage? If you've got one which is bad, do you get another reference form for the same volunteer, or do you simply have to look into it further and maybe the volunteer shouldn't be on that opportunity? I'm going to say I'm going to approve this reference form. So I've approved it, which now it's been held by approving it. It's now holding that reference form against the volunteer. Okay. So the volunteer will now be able to get on that, will now be on that opportunity, essentially. Does everyone understand that? Is there any issues with that? Questions? Put the hands up. Yes, Helen.
I've got two questions. I understand what you've done, but you know where you set the reference up to start with and you gave it a name and then you gave it a description?
Yeah. So
when the reference request goes to the referee, do they see that description rather than just saying, oh, we want a volunteer, you know, this person has given your name for this volunteering opportunity? Will that description show as what the opportunity entails?
That's a good question. Now they won't see the description is for the people who, the admins essentially. So when they look at the reference forms, they says, oh, this is I don't know, an advanced reference form. And then in the description, you might say, this is used for any opportunity which is dealing with the young or the vulnerable or elderly. So it's describing what scenario you should use that reference form in. So it's just it's a reference for the admins, essentially, all the providers to be able to see and decide whether it's suitable for that opportunity.
Okay, so the referee doesn't actually see what the volunteering opportunity entails. It's just the volunteer role heading. Yeah,
just the role heading. Yeah.
Okay.
Some of those, I mean, I suppose you could put the description there, but some descriptions are huge. So I'm not sure. It's always where, yeah, at the moment it's just the title of the opportunity. We added that on. It used to say just ask for a reference, but we added the opportunity. We thought that'd be a useful thing to add on.
Yeah, it's just difficult sometimes for people to give a reference when they don't know what the volunteering opportunity entails. But I suppose it's just more of a character reference rather than suitability for the opportunity, is it?
Well, that's exactly it. Because if you remember what we said before, I mean, the reference at the end is held against the volunteer.
Yeah.
It's really got, I mean, it has got something to do with the opportunity, but I mean, it's just that the opportunity says, I require this level of reference. But the reference form, it isn't actually held against the opportunity in any way. Once it's just saying it requires it, like a DBS,
you
know, or PVG. In that same way, the PVG or the DBSs are not held against the opportunity; they're held against the volunteers.
Yes, of course, that makes sense now.
Which means that it could be used for another opportunity.
Yes.
Which means that next time that volunteer tries to get on an opportunity which requires that same level of reference, it will let them get on the opportunity straight away because it knows that that volunteer already has that reference in place.
Yeah. So it's more to do with the level and the amount of questions. That's fine. My second quick question was, when you attach the reference to the opportunity to say this opportunity requires this reference, if you've already got an opportunity set up and you want to change the reference attached to it, how do you do that the other way around?
You just go to the opportunity. This is the opportunities page. Yep.
Yeah.
That's the opportunity name there. References there. Good question, actually. That would be in the details, wouldn't it? It's a very good question. I've never been asked that before.
Because I've got an opportunity that I've inherited and I want to change I've set up a new reference to attach to that opportunity.
No, it should be in the restrictions, actually. It should be here, if anywhere. That is a very good question. Must be here. There it is there. Okay, so when you go to the opportunity,
Yeah.
go to restrictions on the left-hand side. So this is editing an existing opportunity where you think, oh, actually, it's the wrong reference form, essentially. Or
Yeah.
maybe it requires a reference form.
That's it. I've got it now. So it's restrictions. That's fine. Thank you very much.
Down there. That has to be flicked to yes, and then you'll see all the options up here. Okay, so where do we get down to? We got down to the admin. Sorry, the admin had gone to their references and they'd approved it. Now, once it's been approved, it's held against the volunteer, and the volunteer can then get on the opportunity, essentially. Now, if you want to search for any existing references, you can just click on the search button here. Okay, and I could type in, okay, the volunteer's name, references, okay, here. Yeah, TK volunteer, picks it up and it shows me the reference. You can search for existing references here. But if you go into any, like I say, because it's how the reference form is held against a volunteer, if you go to any volunteer in the system, so I've got a volunteer here called TK volunteer. You'll see it on the left-hand side, you've got references here. I can click on it and then you can always see. So you can go to any volunteer and see if they've got references. So, yep, that sounds like another question.
I was just going to ask, how long does it sit on the volunteer profile? Is it indefinite?
Indefinitely, yeah.
Cool, thank you.
If you want to search, there is filters. If you want to see as well which volunteers, I think there's a filter in the search volunteers page for references. I think it's in the type. There's a filter down here somewhere for show me volunteers which have got references. There it is. So you can search and find every volunteer who hasn't got a reference, for example. But what I wanted to come on to was what do you do with references? So that's one scenario where you say, okay, I've got some opportunities require a reference. And that's a scenario we've just been through there. What about when you say, okay, well, when any volunteer on my system, they should all have at least one reference. So essentially, if you're doing that, you're saying, well, when they register, before they can get any opportunity, I'm going to require a reference. Now, what you could do is you could say, well, okay, then I'm just doing exactly what I did, but for every opportunity, I need to make sure that I'm putting down a requirement to have that reference form, just as exactly the same way as we just did. But that would mean making sure you do it for every single opportunity. What probably a better idea to do would be to say, okay, well, I'm not going to give access to the volunteers. I'm not going to kind of give them access on the system. So when they register, they don't have access. I'm only going to give them access when they've gone through these certain hoops. And one of those hoops is they need to have a reference. In which case you need to manually add a reference to that volunteer. You need to manually add a reference form, which has been created by the admin, to the volunteer, which has nothing to do with any opportunity on the system. And this is how you do that. Your volunteer management down to references, which brings up this page here. Click on create reference. You put in the name of the volunteer. Then says, what's the reference? Now I could put in the referee's name here. Tim Burnett. T Burnett at alienate.com. Attached to an opportunity. I don't have to. See, this is all these red boxes are mandatory fields, but this is not red, so I don't have to attach it to an opportunity. I might just want to store it against the volunteer. It says, okay, then I have to choose a reference form. I say this is a test reference form 3. So this is like a higher level of reference, for example. Okay, and I can complete it manually, which will ask me the questions here down below. So it might be a case, I mean, in the scenario I'm describing, you'd email the request off to the referee in the same way. They've just registered on the system. You've said, that's fine, but before I'm going to give you access to the system, you'll have a chat with them, the induction, or whatever, and you say, I need a reference. And you'd ask them for the referee's name and email address. Okay. A name and email address, and then it would send it off to the referee. If you thought that you had a load of references that were you already had on paper, and you wanted to add them to the TeamKinetic system, which is another scenario I've come across, that's when you'd be completing them manually here and entering them in. Okay. So if I click on that, it's going to ask me to put in the referee's name and email address. If I click on that, then obviously I just fill out the questions and click on save and approve. It's going to ask me to fill this out. And now that volunteer now has 2 references held against them. You have the basic one, which was held against, which was required by the opportunity. Then you also have this manual one that I've entered in myself. Okay, so just to show you, if I go to TK Volunteer, this is their profile page, the volunteer's profile page. Go down to references. They've now got 2 held against them. Okay, any questions? Anything I've covered so far? Okay, good. Well, that's I mean, that's pretty much the crux of it. To be fair, I've kind of covered everything there. Does anyone think that they may start using reference forms now I've been through that? Some people said they weren't using them before. If people who weren't using them before, who've seen that video and think that this still wouldn't work for them, what is the reason? I've got a feeling the reason might be because it's the provider's issue that I think Helen mentioned earlier on.
Yeah.
Is that the reason with the rest of you as well?
It is for us, Steve, definitely. I mean, I'd love to promote this and the DBSs, but unfortunately we can't have all the references coming through to us as super admins. It'd have to go to the providers for approval, because obviously they're the ones raising the opportunities and putting the opportunities onto our platform.
Yeah, I thought that'd be the case. I mean, the kind of issues we're dealing with, just to give you a bit. Yeah.
Try to clarify. I know you said that the super admin, the ones who could create the reference form, but approving references, is that also super admin? Is
just normal admin.
Normal
for
admin.
approving.
Oh,
Or super admin obviously can do everything, but
yeah,
normal admins can approve them. I mean, that's the reason why it's been done this way initially, where it has to be approved by the admins, and we haven't. One of the main reasons, apart from the things I mentioned before about providers, is if you see it's held against anything that's held against a volunteer, like a DBS or PVG or a reference form or anything like that, that can be used across multiple opportunities. Then it's something that has to involve the admin for some kind of approval, because otherwise you could have a provider who's approved a reference form, but then which may be used by a completely different external provider who's required that reference form, and obviously that shouldn't be allowed, because who's to say the first provider's decision was right? You know, where if it's approved by the admin, you say, well, okay, that's someone who's kind of trustworthy, who knows what should be approved and what shouldn't be approved, and that's okay to be used within the system by their providers who work for their organization. You can't have one external provider like the Boy Scouts approving a reference, and then, you know, a gymnastics club down the road saying, yes, we require a reference, and then suddenly letting the volunteer on their opportunity because the Boy Scouts have approved one of their reference forms. So that's the kind of things we have to think about when if we're going to, well, we're talking about at the moment about expanding it into a provider function as well, just to let you know the complexities of it. But well, if there's no other questions, any questions, final questions? Yes, Helen.
Have you got any examples of levels of the references with different questions, with different types of things to ask?
No, I haven't actually. I was kind of hoping. Sometimes I do this, and I've asked people to say, "What kind of questions do you ask?" And no one ever seems to tell me. So I'm not on the front line like you guys. You know, we're sitting here beavering away, typing code, and you know, building functionality and stuff. And so we always take all of our information comes from the front line, from you people, really. So yeah, I always say, what kind of the 2 questions I always know is, are you trustworthy, and how do you know this person? I don't know what other questions appear on reference forms. Has anyone got any ideas? What other things seem to appear on reference forms? Debbie?
Well, I've got a question, but also one of the things we ask for is timekeeping, just because it's.
See, I'll use that one the next training session. Timekeeping.
Are they going to turn up?
Mystica, you got one?
Yeah, we usually ask them sort of what capacity they know the applicant in, how long they've known them for, and then sort of a bit of an overall assessment of their suitability, and then if they're suitable to provide sort of support to vulnerable adults and stuff like that. And also if we can ask them for further information if we need to So hopefully that's a bit helpful.
No, that is helpful, yeah, to me and the people listening. Thank you, Mr. Gill. Debbie?
It's just a question about notifications. I know from admin level, if a provider's created an opportunity, you get an email from the system saying it's waiting for you to go and approve. Do you get the same thing about references waiting for approval?
So say that again. So when say that again, sorry.
Yeah, so one of my providers creates an opportunity.
Yeah.
The system sends me an email saying they've created an opportunity, it's waiting there for you to approve. So give me a prompt to go in.
Yeah, like a trigger you're talking about is what trigger does the admin get to know to go and approve a reference? They
Yes.
get an email. So when the So when the referee completes the reference form and clicks on the submit button, it sends it back and sends an email to the admin saying you have a new reference form which needs to be approved. And then that's the trigger for you to go in there as an admin and go, all right, down to my references. Right, it's awaiting approval. I've just got the email about it and it will appear here. And you'll click on the manage button and then you'll just read it and decide whether to approve it or not. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Any more? Yes, Mr. Kerr.
It's kind of related to references.
That sounds very dubious. That sounds very dubious. You sure? Okay, we're at the end of the session, but go on. Go on then.
Okay, so quickly, it's just finding out, is there a quicker way of doing this? So if you wanted to move a volunteer into an opportunity, sometimes what I do is I will impersonate them and then I will try and join the opportunity by finding the name on their profile. But when I try to apply for it, sometimes you get the references bit pop up and it says you have to enter the references. So then I go back into the opportunity, turn off the reference bit and anything else, and then move them across. Now, this is all before they're sort of approved. Is there a quicker way of doing that, or is that sort of...
So you've got an opportunity which requires a reference form.
Yeah.
And it's an applying opportunity. It requires as an application process. So the volunteers tried to get on the opportunity. And there's two things that have to happen then in that scenario before the volunteer can get onto it. The reference form has to be approved by the admin, and the provider has to approve the volunteer on the opportunity. The order in that comes in, I'm trying to think which one pops up first. It would ask them for the reference form first before it goes through to the provider for approval. That's what it's going to do. And you want it the other way around here. You want them to be able to get on the opportunity and then...
Yeah, I just want to move them across quickly.
If you wanted to move someone across quickly, the best way to do it on an opportunity, you can override any restrictions or all of that stuff. If you ever just go to an opportunity, see what opportunities are on here. If I go to any opportunity, this one here, okay, go to sessions and click on the plus button. Type in the volunteer's name.
But then that approves them, which is sort of the issue.
That would override, like I said, that would override everything.
Okay, I see.
Onto the opportunity. If you want them to get on an opportunity, complex one. You want them to get on an opportunity without being approved, or get to the point where they need to be approved for the opportunity without them having to complete a reference.
Exactly.
I tell you what you could do. Is you could go in there and manually add a reference to that volunteer.
Okay.
You could do that. I mean, it's a bit of a cheat, but it's a bit of a specific scenario that you're after there.
It's only because sometimes what happens is we have some volunteers who want to move between opportunities. So you'll ask them, can you apply for this? But then for that particular opportunity, they have to re-enter their details. It's a bit weird, or sometimes they just don't know how to do it. So I find myself having to move people around a little bit, but that's literally the only reason. I just thought,
it's a bit of a strange one. I mean, because essentially you're taking from an opportunity that requires you're taking a volunteer that hasn't got a reference and you're trying to put them onto an opportunity that does require a reference.
Yeah.
That's the problem there. So should that be the case? I'm trying to understand why you'd want that volunteer on that opportunity if the opportunity requires a reference, they don't have one.
It's just sometimes moving them between opportunities. Gosh, there's so many reasons, and now I can't think of one. I had to do it several times where I had to just move them across. Some of them do have references in place from previous opportunities. And I kind of encourage them to sort of join that. Oh gosh, I'm not making really sense here. I'm trying to think. But also sometimes some people don't have references. So you want them to join it and then sort out the references after, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't, but
no, it does make sense. I've come across this before, and it's something I've been thinking about. So in terms of developing the functionality, so when you, this will probably resonate with a few of you a bit, when you're creating an opportunity at the moment, you have a list of restrictions, and one of those restrictions is it requires a reference. One of those restrictions down here. Am I sharing my screen?
Yeah.
Made that mistake again. So one of the restrictions is it might require a reference, or it might require a criminal record check, or whatever that is, around here somewhere. You know, a number of different things you could put, but all of these restrictions you're putting in place are restrictions that will not let the volunteer get on the opportunity unless they have that thing in place. Okay, and I know that there's an appetite with some of you out there saying, actually, no, I do want them to be able to get onto it, but then I also want to tell them that they will require a reference before they turn up. And it's how that works. So at what stage, what we're kind of wrestling with at the moment is at what stage do you check that person has had a reference before they turn up on the day. So if you're letting them get onto the opportunity, or they're on the opportunity and they've got all the information they need to turn up on the day. So at what stage do you say, actually, I need to, there's an extra check that has to happen. I have to have checked that reference has actually been completed before they turn up.
Yeah.
You know, usually when they get onto the opportunity, that's the step there. They're only on the opportunity when evidence in place. You know, but what you're saying is let them get on the opportunity, but then these things have to be checked, and then there has to be another kind of approval process at the end of there. And I'm not sure how that would look and how that would actually work. But I'm aware of there's a bit of an appetite for that.
It's only certain volunteers. So when we create the opportunity, we want also people externally applying. However, some people who use the services within the Forward Trust, they want to apply to it too. However, I'm talking mainly about peer mentors. So they might not have the right checks, they might not have right documents, things like that. So sometimes I just do want to move them across and sort those bits out after, because we have people within the organization who can provide references or those sort of bits, if that helps a little bit what I'm trying to describe.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I don't think it would resonate with anybody else, because you've got I know Forward Trust, a very specific setup in terms of how the system's used. And so, yeah, I know it's more complex than probably everybody else on here. Tell you what, if you hold on at the end of the meeting, I'll sit down, I'll have a chat with you about your particular setup, and maybe there's a way we can make it a bit simpler.
Perfect. Thank you.
I have to have a think about it. Any other questions, Kerry?
Yeah. Could I, probably a silly question, I'm not sure, but as all our providers are external providers, as you know, Steve, could I make one person from each of the organisations an admin to get round this at all? Or would they then have more access than what we want on the platform?
They would have access then
to see other providers. Right.
See everything that, I mean, they're an admin. They can see everything on the system then, essentially.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah,
I was just trying to think of a way around it.
Yeah. It's a tough one. We've discussed that's a situation a few times. I've discussed it with the development team about how, but you see the problems. It always thinks, oh, I'll just let providers do it. So you really think about it. Well, if it's held against the volunteer, how can I let one provider approve something that's going to be used for other providers? It's not, you know, it is a difficult one, certainly from our side, from
there is just a super admin and then providers, that's it. So
is there an option, Mike said, is there an option for providers to attach their own? That's essentially the way it'd have to work, Mike. Mike just has to kind of basically reiterating what we're chatting about here. And yeah, you're right, Mike. The way it'd have to work is you'd have to allow providers, essentially give them all of everything that an admin can do now in terms of references. You'd have to allow providers to do. That's the only way I could see it working. And you'd have to say, okay, then a provider can create a reference form, put all the questions in. They can then choose that reference form, say an opportunity, one of their opportunities requires that reference form. It'd go through the same process and it'd email the provider instead of the admin for approval of the reference. But then that reference form wouldn't be able to be used by anybody else. It'd only ever be used by that single provider, which means that all of your providers, even in Kerry's example, all the providers would have to create all their own reference forms, which may be fine, but it's just something, there is no standard reference for doing that, unless I suppose maybe we could have like I don't know, maybe you could create, maybe this is me just thinking out loud here, maybe the admin could create a reference form and then share it with providers. Maybe that's an option, so they had like a standard generic one that they could utilize if they wanted to, but still it would go to the provider for approval. But all these things, once you scratch beneath the surface, you really start thinking about it, all these things, you realize how complicated the whole thing is to make it actually work. So you're not to make it work properly. Debbie, your question?
It's one more of a comment. One thing that would help sort of in the interim is if each provider could have, because they can't see the detail of it, it's letting them choose whether they're happy to accept, it's like approve it for their own opportunities, if that makes sense.
I don't know. I see your point, but what would I know? What would they be approving though?
Whether they're happy to accept a different provider's reference, or whether they want to ask for their own.
I'm not sure. The reason why I'm pausing is because the GDPR issues around that. If you've asked whether someone's, one provider could say, I'm not sure about what kind of delicate information would be there that another provider would be able to say, all right, yeah, I'm going to use that. But suppose then the second provider wouldn't be able to see any of the answers. But then if they didn't see the answers, they're not going to know, I suppose, whether it's suitable, whether they should accept it or not, just by seeing the name of the reference. I'm not sure if I'm provider A and it's provider B, and I say, okay, I've created an opportunity. This volunteer has tried to get onto my opportunity, but and they've got a reference form which has been approved by provider B. Do I want to accept it for my opportunity? The question I would ask myself is, well, I don't know what questions have they asked them and what answers have they got. So that's the only thing I'd need to see to be able to make the decision of whether it's acceptable or not.
It's a relationship between providers, if they're partners or they work together. It's not an unknown external organisation. It's someone that you worked with, so you know their processes. You know they're asking the same kind of things as you're asking.
I see your point. Yeah. I see your point. Yeah. So if they said, okay, well, they got a reference from this provider, but that's really all you could really say is reference form. You could probably tell them the opportunity name that it was originally created for, the volunteers, obviously then the volunteer's name, and the reference form name. You couldn't really give them any more information than that. I think without kind of breaking GDPR policy.
Yeah, I get that. It's just trying to think of a simpler way of doing it.
Yeah. We're like I say, it's not the only function. There's about 5 functions on here. Roles is another one. Roles, GBSs, references, where they all hit this same issue, and it is this issue that we're talking about now. It's okay. Well, admins have to approve these things. What happens if I've got external providers? How do I deal with that then? And you're going to end up, once you solve one problem, I suppose we'd be able to solve them all, because it's all dealing with that same issue. It's who approves it, and should it be used for other providers as well? But as you can imagine now, it's quite complex. But so this works perfectly for organizations where the providers work for them. But outside of that, I understand, because of what we just spoke about, it is an issue at the moment. Any other questions? Okay, well, if there's no further questions, I'll let you shoot off, and I hope you found that useful.